This is Better Than News, and I'm Joe Darginio with your weekly White House report. While the talking heads continue to distract you with the weather balloon, the president is extending sanctions on Myanmar, also known as Burma, and apparently we're coming to the end of the COVID emergency, but nobody else is talking about that. Here's what the president's doing.
Here on whitehouse.gov in the briefing room under presidential actions. We've got a few actions for this week. We're going to take a quick look here, but move ahead and then come back to it. Notice on continuation of the national emergency with respect to the situation in and relation to Burma, also known as Myanmar. This was February 6th, which was Monday. And we're going to come back to that. This is the notice and then the letters to House and Congress echoing that notice. But apparently on February 6th, he also approved a disaster declaration in North Dakota. Let's help all the people we can, but we don't want the politicians doing the spending for us. That's never a good thing. So federal funding is available for mitigation measures statewide, and so federal funding, again, never a good thing, politicians spending money. And here on February 7th, the Tuesday, we amended an existing disaster declaration. Was at 75% of the total eligible costs, and it has been increased to 90% of the total eligible costs. Politicians spending money. Look, help your neighbor. Don't ask your politicians to do it for you. So this is extremely interesting too. On February 10th, notice on the continuation of the national emergency concerning the coronavirus disease 2019 COVID-19 pandemic. And of course the associated letter to the House and Congress echoing the same thing. This is very interesting. We're continuing the national emergency declared on March 13th, 2020, which was Proclamation 9994. And I'm sure we'll take a look at that at some point, so make sure you subscribe and catch that when we go over it. But the interesting part, this last line here, I anticipate terminating the national emergency concerning the COVID-19 pandemic on May 11th of 2023. And it's interesting how we can predict 3 months out that all of a sudden this is no longer going to be a national emergency. I will definitely be paying attention and bring you any related updates. Might even have a special report between now and then. That's interesting that they would pick that date. That's right about Mother's Day, give or take a week. So back to the situation in Burma. Now Burma is also known as Myanmar, and why they call it two different things is probably just an effort to confuse you. But Executive Order 14014 going back 2 years ago, and we'll take a look at that. In particular, the February 2021 coup in which the military overthrew the democratically elected civilian government of Burma and unjustly arrested and detained government leaders, politicians, human rights defenders, journalists, and religious leaders, thereby rejecting the will of the people of Burma as expressed in elections held in November 2020, and undermining the country's democratic transition and rule of law, continues to pose an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States. So for this reason, the national emergency declared in 2021 must continue beyond February 2023 and continuing it for 1 year with respect to Burma, also known as Myanmar. So when I say Myanmar, know that I'm talking about Burma. So this Executive Order 14014, what is that about? So simple Google search and it comes right up, and it's about blocking money, blocking resources, blocking travel, may not be transferred, paid, exported, withdrawn, otherwise dealt in any foreign person, determined by the Secretary of Treasury in consultation with the Secretary of State. Now, we talked about the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken. At some point, I'm sure we'll take a good look at the Secretary of Treasury as well. So, talking about the defense sector of the Burmese economy, actions or policies that undermine the democratic process or institutions in Burma, policies that threaten the peace security of Burma, and this is all determined by the Secretary of State and Secretary of Treasury. So they are the arbiter of what is defined as disruptive or non-democratic. The term Government of Burma means the government of Burma, any political subdivision, agency, or instrumentality thereof, including the Central Bank of Myanmar. Any person owned or controlled by or acting for on behalf of the government of Burma. And that's interesting that they might refer to any person owned or controlled by a government. The Secretary of Treasury, in consultation with the Secretary of State, is hereby authorized to take such actions, including promulgation of rules and regulations, and to employ all powers granted to the President So that's that executive order in a nutshell. Okay, so what else is going on in Burma? Well, they mentioned the military coup, and it was this guy, I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce this correctly, but Min Aung Hlaing. Forgive me for how horribly I probably pronounced that. And he has extensive service to the military over there from 1974 to currently, and I assume that's including his military leadership in the coup d'etat, but he served as Joint Chief of Staff and assumed office in 2011 as a Commander-in-Chief of Defense Services, and now he has taken control of the government. Now, of course, there's two sides to every story, isn't there? So he apparently is claiming that the elections that elected the National League for Democracy was not a legitimate election, and has used that as the pretense to take control. So several other very interesting factors that are going on here. Quick look at the Central Bank of Myanmar, talks about it having took over the functions of the Rangoon branches of the Reserve Bank of India. So that probably bears some more looking into. That was 1947 that transition took place. So they did specify in that executive order the Central Bank of Myanmar, and of course we always want to follow the money. So we definitely should take into consideration what's going on there. Also going on in Myanmar, according to export.gov, one of our own government websites, this is a best prospect industry sector for this country, which is healthcare. The National League for Democracy, which is the party that was ousted by the military coup, has made healthcare a top priority with increased budget allocations, and working up to 1.13 trillion of their currency. The Kyat, I believe, is possibly how that is pronounced, and Myanmar's total pharmaceutical spending has been increased at 11% every year, and is expected that the pharmaceutical market's value can reach $1.1 billion, that's a US dollar sign, by 2023. So this is a $1.1 billion market of just pharmaceuticals that is questionable at this point, is being contested in some capacity. It'll be interesting to see how much money the military leader has allocated for pharmaceutical spending. I bet you it's not $1.1 billion. So what else is going on there? U.S. relations, according to state.gov, and we've apparently been over there, U.S. assistance to Burma. Apparently the United States Agency for International Development had a mission there that closed in 1989, resumed targeted health programs in 1998, and scaled up assistance efforts in response to devastation caused by Cyclone Nargis in 2008. United States Agency for International Development redirected $42.4 million of FY 2020 bilateral assistance away from work that benefits the government of Burma. United States Agency for International Development and the Centers for Disease Control are engaging civil society and multilateral stakeholders to revitalize the COVID-19 response, including vaccine deployment. Now, at the same time, we've also been over there trying to increase the level of democracy, shall we say. And this, again, is according to the United States Agency for International Development. And they support credible, inclusive, and informed elections by providing technical assistance to political parties, civil society, and the country's electoral commission. Promotes democratic transparency and accountability through support to Burmese civil society and independent media. So our government is over there, engaging with communities on peace process, intercommunal harmony, religious freedom, ethnic inclusion, human rights and women's rights, preparing for the 2020 elections through consultations with civil society and political parties at the state and regional level. Look, they funded a survey on people's perception of corruption and rule of law, so they can develop approaches to reduce corruption. Or if we're talking about the perceptions, are they reducing the appearance of corruption? Now keep in mind, this is currently a Biden appointee, Samantha Power, at the head of the United States Agency for International Development. And there's a lot still being contested about the elections that elected Biden. And there are many, many issues that, in the minds of many Americans, have not been properly addressed. Hopefully we're developing some level of justice in that situation. But considering how questionable a lot of it is, to see his people over there establishing the democratic process in support, or rather where a political party that is liberal and wants to spend $1 billion on pharmaceuticals, you gotta wonder where the money's going here. So what else is going on in Myanmar? Human trafficking, lots of it. Simple search and you will come up with reports upon reports upon reports, including those from our own state.gov and other governmental agencies. It's been an issue over there for a long, long time. So we've got a new democracy and a military coup ousting a party that wants to spend $1 billion on pharmaceuticals and lots of human trafficking. I have to wonder exactly why we are imposing sanctions on their new military government. Now, in some cases, a military government overthrowing a mishandled election would be the right thing in a lot of people's mind. It would be a dutiful and good thing to overthrow a government that has been inappropriately put into power.
So, rampant human trafficking, a $1 billion pharmaceutical market amid accusations of a fraudulent election. There's a lot going in Myanmar, and apparently our Secretary of State and Secretary of Treasury are the arbiters of who's on the right side of this. So we're going to take a close look at those in a couple of upcoming videos. We're also going to look for the end of COVID, which should be coming up in May. That'll be great. So if your regular news source isn't covering these sorts of things, give it a subscribe, a like, a share, and we'll keep doing this. Thank you for watching.